She just wanted to forget the past, until she saw that man diving into the pool. The water rose in steam, desire burned inside, and so did fear. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're watching from. On the first morning of autumn, when the sky still hesitated between blue and grey over the hills of Stone Ridge, Elaine Davis woke to the sound of water. It wasn't rain. The weather was dry, typical of March in rural Virginia. It was something deeper, more constant, as if the earth itself was breathing through liquid. She got up from the narrow bed in the rented cottage and walked to the window, pushing aside the yellowed linen curtains that smelled of mothballs and solitude. That's when she saw him. The man was diving in the swimming pool behind the Van Saunders mansion with the precision of someone executing a ritual. His broad shoulders cut through the water's surface in slow, almost meditative movements, and each stroke seemed to carry the weight of an untold story. Elaine held her breath. There was something hypnotic about that solitary dance, something that made her feel as if she were watching a secret she shouldn't witness. The mansion rose imposingly against the horizon, its Gothic towers lost in the morning mist. During the 3 days she had been in Stone Ridge, Elaine had heard whispers about the property. The Van Saunders family carried a dark reputation, fortunes built on minerals extracted from the earth, marriages broken by inexplicable tragedies, and an heir who had lived in seclusion for more than 2 decades, Henry Van Saunders. The name was pronounced in low voices in the town's bakeries and pharmacies, always accompanied by cautious glances and uncomfortable silences. Elaine pressed her fingers against the cold window glass. At 48, she had learned to recognize the signs of danger. And that man in the pool, with his fluid movements and his ostentatious solitude, emanated a seductive dangerousness that made her question all the sensible reasons that had brought her to this place. She had left Springfield in search of silence. The divorce from Mark had been too civilized to be genuine. Papers signed, assets divided. 22 years of marriage concluded with the formality of a business transaction. But Elaine carried wounds that lawyers couldn't heal. The miscarriage at 35 had left her with a void that no amount of time had managed to fill. And before that, much earlier, there had been Lucas, her first love, the man who had disappeared from her life without explanation when she was just 22, leaving her pregnant and helpless. The cottage in Stone Ridge had seemed perfect for her escape. Small, discreet, with a partial view of the mountains and the isolation necessary for her to finally write. For years she had taught literature in private schools in Springfield, helping teenagers decipher the mysteries of Hemingway and Virginia Woolf. Now, retired early thanks to the divorce settlement, she had time to discover her own words. But that morning, observing the invisible neighbor's strange aquatic ritual, Elaine felt something she hadn't expected: curiosity. A dangerous curiosity, the kind that reminded her of the 22-year-old who believed that love could heal any wound. The man got out of the pool with the same grace with which he had entered. Elaine could see him better now. Dark wet hair stuck to his skull, skin that seemed to never know the sun, muscles defined without ostentation. He wrapped himself in a dark robe and for a moment turned in the direction of her window. Elaine instinctively retreated, but had the disturbing impression that he had seen her. For the rest of the day she tried to focus on writing, but the words seemed to flee from her. She walked through the small living room of the cottage, organized and reorganized the books she had brought, prepared teas that cooled untouched. The image of the man in the pool haunted her like an irritating melody she couldn't get out of her head. By evening she decided to walk to town. Stone Ridge had the melancholic charm of small Virginian towns, well-preserved colonial houses, stone streets that told century-old stories, and a rhythm of life that seemed to have stopped in time. Elaine bought bread at the local bakery, where the owner, a curious-eyed lady named Mrs. Martha, couldn't resist striking up a conversation. "You rented Mr. Benedict's cottage, didn't you?" she asked, wrapping the bread with more care than necessary. "Beautiful place, privileged view. You must be able to see the mansion from there," Elaine confirmed with a nod, sensing that the conversation would take the direction she feared. "The Van Saunders are an old family in this region," Mrs. Martha continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Young Henry returned not long ago. More than 20 years away, we didn't even expect to see him around here anymore. Did he live abroad? Elaine asked, feigning casual disinterest. Oh, my dear, it was a tragedy. The baker shook her head with regret. The young man was going to marry an outsider, a woman named Anna. Beautiful as an angel, but a bit strange, you know. She talked to herself, had odd customs. One night, she disappeared. They found her almost drowning in the mansion's pool, delirious, saying things without meaning. She was never the same again. Elaine felt a shiver run down her spine. And what happened to her? They committed the poor thing to a sanitarium in Bartonville. Henry was devastated, disappeared from the world, only returned now, alone, living, like a ghost in that mansion. Elaine returned to the cottage with Mrs. Martha's words echoing in her mind like distant bells. Night came quickly to the mountains, bringing with it a thick fog that transformed the landscape into something almost unreal. The lights of the Van Saunders mansion shone weakly through the mist, like dying stars in a cotton sky. She prepared a simple dinner, scrambled eggs, toasted bread, chamomile tea, but ate mechanically, her thoughts focused on the tragic story she had just heard. Anna. The name sounded foreign, different, charged with mystery. Elaine tried to imagine what the woman who had nearly drowned in the pool where, hours earlier, she had seen Henry swim with such serenity would be like. While washing the dishes, an unexpected sound made her stop. Piano. The notes came from the direction of the mansion, floating through the night like whispered laments. The melody was sad, complex, full of pauses that seemed to carry more meaning than the notes themselves. Elaine dried her hands and went out to the small porch of the cottage, where the sound reached her more clearly. She didn't recognize the composition, but something in it touched a familiar chord in her chest. It was as if the music spoke a language she understood without ever having learned it. She closed her eyes and let herself be carried away by the sound waves that rose and fell like emotional tides. When she opened her eyes again, she almost screamed in fright. A man was standing at the boundary between the properties, watching her. Even in the dim light, she recognized the silhouette she had seen in the pool that morning. Henry Van Saunders was there, just a few meters away from her, studying her with an intensity that made her blush in the dark. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice was deep, educated, carrying an almost imperceptible accent that Elaine couldn't identify. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I'm Henry, your neighbor." Elaine struggled to find her own voice. Elaine Davis. Sorry, I didn't know there was anyone there." He took a step closer, and the weak light from the porch partially illuminated his face. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps about 45, with aristocratic features accentuated by a paleness that suggested little sun. His eyes were dark, deep, the kind that seemed to keep secrets like safes keep jewels. "The music," Elaine said, trying to break the tense silence. "Was that you playing? It's beautiful." A melancholy smile crossed his lips. "An original composition. I play better at night. During the day, the notes seem inadequate." "Original composition?" Elaine repeated, impressed. "Are you a musician?" "Among other things." Henry shrugged as if the question were irrelevant. "And you? What brought you to Stonebridge? We don't often receive visitors outside of winter season." Elaine hesitated. She wasn't ready to share her story with a stranger, however intriguing he might be. "I came seeking silence to write." "Ah, a writer." There was genuine interest in his voice now. "What kind of stories do you write?" "I'm still discovering," she admitted. "I taught literature for years, but never tried to create my own stories." "Literature teaches us that the best stories are born from poorly healed wounds," said Henry, and there was something prophetic in his tone that made Elaine shiver. "Do you have wounds, Elaine Davis?" The question was too invasive for a first conversation, but there was something in the way he formulated it that prevented her from taking offense. It was as if he could see through her, recognizing pains that she herself was still learning to name. "Everyone does," she responded, choosing diplomacy. True? He remained silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the fog that was thickening around them. May I make a strange invitation, Elaine? Would you like to see my library? I have a considerable collection of first editions that might interest a literature professor. Elaine knew she should refuse. Everything about that situation screamed caution. The mysterious man, the somber mansion, the whispered stories in town. But there was something magnetic about Henry, something that pulled her like emotional gravity. Now? She asked. If you... Don't mind the darkness. The mansion is more interesting at night. Elaine looked at the cottage behind her, then at the enigmatic figure in front of her. In Springfield, she would never accept such an invitation. But Stone Ridge seemed to operate under different rules where the impossible became merely improbable. Let me get a coat, she said. The walk to the mansion was silent, punctuated only by the sound of their steps on the damp grass and the occasional creak of branches moved by the wind. Henry walked with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of that terrain, even in the dark. Elaine followed him, trying to ignore the rational voice in her head that insisted this was madness. The Van Sanders mansion was even more imposing up close. Built in neo-Gothic style, its towers were lost in the night mist, and the dark windows looked like the closed eyes of a sleeping giant. Henry led her through a side entrance, through a garden where pale flowers shone ghost-like under the weak moon. My family built this house at the beginning of the last century, he explained as he opened a heavy door of carved wood. My great-grandfather was obsessed with Gothic architecture. He said houses should reflect the souls of their inhabitants. Elaine entered behind him into a long corridor, lit by ancient candelabras that projected dancing shadows on the walls, lined with Victorian wallpaper. Portraits of serious faces watched her from the walls, generations of Van Sanders who seemed to carry the weight of ancestral secrets. The library of the Van Sanders mansion was a sanctuary of knowledge that took Elaine's breath away. Mahogany bookcases rose from floor to ceiling on walls that seemed to have no end, filled with leather-bound volumes that exuded the unmistakable perfume of ancient pages and accumulated wisdom. A cast-iron library ladder allowed access to the highest levels, where rare titles slumbered in respectful twilight. "My God," murmured Elaine, turning slowly to absorb the magnitude of the collection. "There must be thousands of books here." Henry lit some strategically positioned candles, preferring the golden dancing light to the coldness of electricity. Almost 15,000 volumes. 3 generations of Van Sanders were obsessive bibliophiles. My grandfather even traveled throughout Europe just to acquire medieval manuscripts. Elaine approached a bookcase dedicated to American literature, and her eyes widened as she recognized first editions of Hemingway, Faulkner, and Fitzgerald. Books worth a fortune, treated with the reverential care they deserved. "You can touch them," said Henry, noting her hesitation. Books were made to be handled, not worshipped from a distance. She carefully removed a copy of The Great Gatsby, whose original binding was in perfect condition. Upon opening it, she found a handwritten dedication from Fitzgerald himself to an esteemed Arthur Van Sanders. Elaine looked at Henry with surprise. "My great-grandfather personally knew several writers of the time," he explained with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Arthur was a patron of the arts. He financed young talents, organized literary soirees, maintained correspondence with intellectuals from across the country." "And you? Do you write too?" Elaine asked, gently leafing through the yellowed pages. "I used to. Poetry, mainly. But I discovered that words can be dangerous. Sometimes they reveal more than they should." There was something in the way he said this that made Elaine look at him more carefully. In the golden light of the candles, Henry seemed even paler, almost spectral. His hands, she noticed, were fine and elegant, but trembled slightly. A pianist's hands, or those of a man who carried invisible burdens. "May I ask about Anna?" The question escaped before Elaine could censor herself. The silence that followed was as dense as the fog outside. Henry moved away from her, walking to a leather armchair where he sat with careful movements as if every gesture were calculated. "I heard about the story in town," Elaine continued, feeling obliged to explain. I don't want to be invasive, but Anna was... Henry paused, the words seeming to form with difficulty. She was different. From Denmark, daughter of diplomats. We met in New York at a contemporary art exhibition. She had a peculiar way of seeing the world, as if she saw layers of reality that the rest of us didn't perceive. Elaine put the book back on the shelf and approached, sitting in the armchair opposite his. You were engaged? For 2 years. She moved here to the mansion. At first, she seemed happy. She spent hours in this library, reading voraciously, writing in journals she kept in Danish. But gradually, she began to change. Change how? Henry remained silent for so long that Elaine thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. She started talking to herself, long conversations with people who weren't there. She said the mansion had memories, that the walls held secrets she could hear. I thought it was isolation, the adaptation to a place so different from what she knew. But it wasn't. One night I woke up and she wasn't in bed. I searched throughout the house and found her in the pool, floating on her back, eyes open, completely motionless. I thought she was dead. Henry ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that betrayed an old anguish. When I pulled her from the water, she began to scream. She said I wasn't real, that I was a projection of something evil that inhabited the mansion, that I was trying to drown her, as I had drowned the others. Elaine felt a chill run down her spine. Others? Delusions. At least that's what the doctors said. Anna was committed that night. Diagnosis of psychotic break, possibly triggered by social isolation and genetic predisposition. I visited her every day for months, but she didn't recognize me, or pretended not to recognize me. And now, how is she? Still committed, in a catatonic state for more than 15 years. The doctors say it's unlikely she'll recover. Henry rose abruptly, walking to one of the library windows. I disappeared after that. I couldn't live here anymore, surrounded by her memories, by the things she said. Elaine absorbed the story in silence, trying to process the tragedy behind Henry's carefully chosen words. There were gaps in the narrative, things unsaid that hung in the air like the shadows cast by the candles. "Why did you come back?" she asked softly. Henry didn't turn around, keeping his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. "Because this is where I belong. This house, this land, this isolation. They're as much a part of me as my own blood. And because..." He hesitated. "Because maybe it's time to understand what really happened to Anna." "What do you mean?" He finally turned, and Elaine saw something in his eyes that made her regret the question. It was a mixture of determination and desperation that spoke of a man on the verge of discoveries he might prefer not to make. Her diaries. I found some hidden, written in Danish. I had them translated recently. Anna wasn't delusional, Elaine. She was investigating. The history of my family, this mansion, the women who lived here before her. Elaine stood up, a growing unease taking hold of her. And what did she discover? That the Van Sanders have a long tradition of losing the women they love, and that all of them, in one way or another, ended up in the water. Henry's words echoed in the library like a dark omen. Elaine felt her legs weaken, and she leaned against the nearest bookcase, trying to process the implication of what she had just heard. The candlelight seemed to have dimmed, as if the flames themselves were reacting to the revelation. "I don't understand," she murmured. "What do you mean by ended up in the water?" Henry walked to an old desk and removed a yellowed envelope from a drawer. Inside were sepia photographs showing women from different eras, all beautiful, all with a melancholic air that transcended time. "This is Isabella," he said, pointing to a portrait of a dark-haired woman with large eyes and wavy hair. "My great-grandfather Arthur's wife, found dead in the property's lake in 1923. Supposed suicide." Elaine took the photograph with trembling hands. There was something familiar about Isabella's face, a disturbing resemblance that she couldn't quite identify. "This is Carmen, my grandfather's wife." Another photograph, a blonde with a sad smile in 1950s attire. drowned in a flood of the river that runs behind the property, an accident, according to the records. And this one? Elaine pointed to a third photo of a young woman with delicate features and light eyes. My mother, Letitia. Henry's voice became even deeper. Found in the pool when I was 12. Apparent heart attack while swimming alone in the early morning. Elaine returned the photographs, her hands visibly trembling. This can't be coincidence. That's what Anna thought. She found old records, death certificates, archived police reports. She began to trace a pattern that went back more than a century. Women from the Van Sanders family, or women who married into the Van Sanders family, all found dead in suspicious aquatic circumstances. But why? What would be the motive? Henry carefully put the photographs back in the envelope, his movements too careful to be natural. Anna believed there was something hereditary, not genetically but spiritually, as if this land, this mansion, demanded sacrifices, as if there were an entity that fed on female sorrow. Elaine felt a shiver run down her entire spine. The library, which moments before had seemed welcoming, now felt claustrophobic. The shadows cast by the candles seemed to move independently of their sources, and she had the disturbing impression of being watched by the portraits on the walls. "Do you believe that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know what to believe. I only know that the women I loved disappear." Henry approached her, and Elaine could see the real suffering in his eyes. "Anna was the only person who made me feel alive after my mother's death, and when she started investigating these stories, she began to change, as if something were consuming her from within." "What happened on the night you found her in the pool?" She had spent the entire day locked in this library, translating an old diary she had found hidden behind some books. When she came down for dinner, she was agitated, talking too fast, connecting dots that I couldn't see. She said she had discovered the truth about the deaths, that they weren't suicides or accidents. What were they then? Henry hesitated, as if the next words were difficult to pronounce. According to her, they were rituals, offerings, women being delivered to the water to appease something that had inhabited this land since before the mansion was built. Elaine instinctively backed away. The story sounded absurd, but there was something in the way Henry told it, a painful sincerity that prevented her from dismissing it all as fantasy. "And you? Do you believe you killed these women?" "Not consciously. But—" He paused, running his hands over his face in an expression of profound exhaustion. "But there are gaps in my memory, Elaine. Entire nights that have simply disappeared from my recollection. I wake up in places I don't remember going to, and always there is water involved." Elaine felt the floor seem unstable beneath her feet. She was alone in an isolated mansion, with a man who had just confessed to suspecting he was an unconscious murderer. All her rationality screamed for her to run, but there was something stronger keeping her there. A morbid curiosity, perhaps. Or perhaps something deeper and more dangerous. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Why did you bring me here tonight?" Henry looked at her with an intensity that made her blush. "Because since I saw you this morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a connection. And because—" He came closer, so close she could feel the warmth of his body. "Because you have the same look they had, sad but strong, wounded but not broken." Elaine should have run away at that moment. She should have screamed, called for help, done anything except remain there, hypnotized by the dark eyes of a man who had just admitted to being potentially dangerous. But there was something magnetic about Henry, something that spoke directly, out of the wounded parts of her soul. "I need to go," she said, but her voice sounded weak, not convincing even to herself. "Of course. Let me walk you back." The way back to the cottage was traveled in tense silence. Elaine was hyper-aware of every sound, the crunch of the grass beneath their feet, Henry's controlled breathing beside her, the whisper of the wind in the trees. When they reached the cottage door, she turned to say goodbye and found him much closer than she expected. "Elaine," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I know tonight was intense, but I'd like to see you again. There are more things I need to show you if you're willing to listen." She should have said no. She should have locked the door and packed her bags the next morning. Instead, she heard herself say, "Tomorrow night?" The smile that spread across Henry's face was both relieved and predatory. "Tomorrow night," he confirmed. "And Elaine, be careful with dreams. This land, sometimes it speaks to us while we sleep." Elaine spent the night sleepless, Henry's words echoing in her mind like persistent waves. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photographs of the dead women, their melancholy faces seeming to whisper warnings she couldn't decipher. When she finally fell asleep, it was almost dawn, and her dreams were populated by dark waters and female voices calling her name. She woke with the sensation that someone was watching her. The morning was cloudy, with a fine drizzle that transformed the landscape into a blurred watercolor. Elaine got out of bed with aching muscles, as if she had been swimming for hours. It was then that she noticed her clothes from the night before, scattered on the floor in a strange manner, as if they had been removed in haste, and her feet were dirty with mud. She ran to the mirror and examined her reflection with growing alarm. Small twigs were tangled in her hair, and there were superficial scratches on her arms that weren't there the night before. Elaine tried to remember if she had left the cottage after Henry brought her back, but her memory was an impenetrable fog. She took a long, hot bath, trying to wash away the feeling of unease that seemed stuck to her skin. While getting dressed, she found a letter that had been slipped under her door. The paper was thick, old, and the handwriting had the antiquated elegance of past times. "Elaine," the letter said, "you walk in your sleep." As they all walked, the water calls and you answer. Be careful not to get lost in the call. A friend. Elaine reread the message several times, her hands trembling. Who could have written that? And what did "you walk in your sleep" mean? She had never been a sleepwalker, not that she knew of. But the physical evidence, the mud, the scratches, the rumpled clothes, suggested that something had happened during the night. She decided to go to town to clear her head. Stone Ridge seemed different under the morning drizzle, darker, as if the very atmosphere carried omens. At Mrs. Martha's bakery, she ordered coffee and a cinnamon roll, trying to appear normal while inwardly feeling completely lost. "You're pale, dear," Mrs. Martha observed, serving the steaming coffee. "Sleep badly." "A bit," Elaine admitted. "Mrs. Martha, may I ask you something strange? Have you heard of sleepwalking in this region, perhaps related to the Van Saunders mansion?" The baker's expression changed instantly, becoming cautious. "Why do you ask that?" "Curiosity. Yesterday I talked with Mr. Henry and he mentioned some peculiarities of the family." Mrs. Martha looked around the empty bakery, then leaned over the counter, lowering her voice. "My grandmother used to say that mansion had a strange influence on certain women, especially those who came from outside who didn't have roots in the land." "What kind of influence?" "Called them during the night, made them walk to the water as if they were hypnotized. My grandmother said the land underneath is saturated with female sadness, that the tears of so many generations created a thirst." Elaine felt a chill run down her spine. "And you believe that?" "I've seen things, dear. Full moon nights, figures, in nightgowns walking through the hills toward the Van Saunders. Always women, always alone, always with that strange walk of someone who isn't completely awake." "And what happened to them?" "Some returned the next morning, wet and confused, remembering nothing. Others," Mrs. Martha shook her head, "others we only found later." Elaine drank the coffee without tasting it, absorbing the implications of the baker's words. "Mrs. Martha, did you know Henry's fiancée, Anna?" "Ah, that poor thing, beautiful girl, but marked from the moment she arrived here. In the first month she seemed normal, came to town, bought books, talked to everyone. But then she began to change, became obsessive, asking strange questions about the family history, asking to see old documents at City Hall." "What kind of documents?" "Death certificates, property records, old council minutes. She said she was writing a book about the region, but everyone realized it was something more personal." Elaine finished her coffee and paid the bill, but before leaving she asked one more question. "Do you know where the sanitarium is where Anna is committed?" Mrs. Martha studied her with shrewd eyes. "In Bartonville, About 50 miles from here. But why do you want to know that, dear? Don't tell me you're thinking of visiting her. It's a possibility. Be careful, Elaine. I know it's not my business, but that family brings misfortune to any woman who gets too close. And you, she hesitated, you have a look that reminds me of the others, of those who didn't come back. Elaine left the bakery with more questions than answers. The drizzle had stopped, but the sky remained heavy, promising a storm. She decided to walk to the municipal library, a small colonial building in the town's central square. Perhaps she would find more information about the history of the Van Saunders family in the local archives. The librarian, a grey-haired lady named Mrs. Rose, became visibly uncomfortable when Elaine mentioned her interest in the history of the Van Saunders, but she eventually relented, taking her to a section of dusty archives where historical documents of the region were kept. "No one has touched these papers in years," murmured Mrs. Rose, unlocking an iron cabinet. "But if it's for academic research—" Elaine spent hours leafing through yellow documents, certificates, old newspaper clippings. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. In each generation, without exception, there was at least one female death in the Van Saunders family, always related to water. And in several cases, there were mentions of strange behavior preceding the deaths. Women seen walking alone at night, talking to themselves, acting as if they were under the influence of something invisible. The most disturbing document was a police report from 1923, describing the death of Isabella Van Saunders. According to witnesses, she had been seen walking through the mansion garden at 3 in the morning, wearing only a white nightgown, moving as if dancing with an invisible partner. Her body was found in the lake 3 days later. When Elaine finally left the library, the sun was already setting behind the mountains. She returned to the cottage with a stack of photocopies and a growing feeling that she was being pulled into something much larger and more dangerous than she had initially imagined. Upon entering the cottage, she found Henry waiting for her on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair that she was certain hadn't been there that morning. "You've been investigating," said Henry when Elaine approached the porch. It wasn't a question, but an observation, and there was something in his tone that she couldn't completely decipher, approval perhaps, mixed with genuine concern. Elaine stopped on the first step, maintaining a safe distance. In the evening light, Henry seemed even paler, almost translucent, as if he were made more of memory than of flesh and bone. "How do you know?" "Mrs. Rose called me. She gets nervous when someone messes with the family archives, and Mrs. Martha also mentioned your morning visit." He stood up from the rocking chair, moving with that controlled grace that Elaine was beginning to recognize. "What did you find?" Elaine hesitated, the documents burning in her hands like evidence of a crime. A pattern. Women dying in each generation, always in water, always preceded by strange behavior. "Sleepwalking," completed Henry. "Yes, Anna found that too. It was what convinced her that these weren't coincidences." "Henry, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." Elaine climbed one more step, facing him directly. "Did you drug me last night? Put something in my tea or—" "No." The denial was immediate, categorical. "Why? What happened?" Elaine described the physical signs she had found upon waking, the mud, the scratches, the rumpled clothes. As she spoke, she saw Henry's expression slowly transform from concern to something that looked like genuine horror. "It's showing itself faster than I imagined," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "What is showing itself faster?" Henry didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed an envelope similar to the one Elaine had found under her door from his pocket. "Did you receive this morning?" Elaine confirmed, showing him the letter. Henry read quickly, his expression becoming even darker. "The handwriting," he said. "Do you recognize it?" Elaine examined the words more carefully. There was something familiar about the formation of the letters, an antiquated elegance that, "It's the same as in the photographs you showed me yesterday, the old documents. It's the handwriting of my great-grandmother, Isabella, the first to die in the lake." A heavy silence settled between them. Elaine felt her legs weaken and she leaned on the porch railing. That's impossible. She died more than 100 years ago. Impossible would be the word I would use until a few weeks ago, said Henry, pocketing the letter. But since I returned to the mansion, impossible things have become routine. What kind of things? Voices in the corridors during the early hours. Wet footprints appearing on dry floors, and letters, many letters, all with the handwriting of dead women from the family, all addressed to living women. Elaine felt a chill run down her spine. Other women received letters. Anna received one per week during the last month before the incident in the pool, all signed by different women from the family, but all with the same basic message. Warnings about the water, about walking during sleep, about not trusting me. And you, do you write these letters? Henry looked at her with an intensity that made her take a step back. That's the question, isn't it? Do I do this consciously and not remember? Is there something in me, something inherited or incorporated, that uses my hands to write warnings to the women I desire to protect? You want to protect me? More than my own life, he answered, and there was a brutal sincerity in his voice that made Elaine blush. But I also recognize that I may be exactly what you need to be protected from. Elaine descended the steps and entered the cottage, Henry following her. She placed the documents on the kitchen table and spread them out like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Look at this, she said, pointing to a newspaper clipping from 1954. Carmen Van Saunders, your grandmother, found dead after a flood. But look at the date, July. It's not flood season here in Virginia. Henry examined the document. And this one about my mother's death. It says she suffered a heart attack while swimming, but Letitia was 28 and in perfect health. She never had heart problems. It's as if someone were forging the causes of death, creating plausible explanations to cover up something more sinister. Or as if something were manipulating the circumstances to create deaths that seemed natural, but weren't. Elaine sat, heavily in a chair, the weight of the discoveries oppressing her. Henry, I need to ask you a difficult question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Ask. Do you remember killing your mother? The silence that followed was so deep that Elaine could hear her own heart beating. Henry remained motionless for so long that she began to worry, but finally he answered, his voice a harsh whisper. I remember waking up in the pool next to her body. I remember being wet, though I didn't remember entering the water. And I remember a strange sensation, as if I had watched everything happen from outside my own body. You were 12 years old. I was. But I was tall for my age, strong. And there was something in me that night, something that wasn't completely mine. Elaine got up slowly and walked to the window that faced the mansion. The Gothic construction rose against the night sky like a dark promise. I think this entity, whatever it is, uses the Van Saunders men to kill the women they love. It's a theory. Anna believed there was something in the land, something that predated the construction of the mansion, that fed on female suffering, and that my family inadvertently became an instrument of this thing. But why do the women walk to the water voluntarily? Why don't they resist? Henry approached her from behind, and Elaine could feel the heat of his body, the masculine smell of his skin mixed with something more subtle, moisture, perhaps, as if he permanently carried the perfume of water. Because it makes them feel complete, he said, his voice low and hypnotic. Makes them feel finally understood, loved in a way they've never experienced before. The water promises peace, Elaine, promises an end to pain. Elaine turned to face him and realized he was so close that she could see the small golden flecks in his dark eyes. There was something magnetic about that proximity, something that made her want to move even closer, even knowing the risks. And you? She asked. What do you promise? I promise only the truth, Henry replied, raising a hand to gently touch her face, even if that truth destroys us both. Henry's touch on her face triggered something primitive in Elaine, a need she had buried during years of passionless marriage and silent mourning. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't resist. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, but quickly intensified, charged with a desperate urgency that spoke of shared loneliness and lost time. When they separated, Elaine was trembling. Not from fear, she realized with surprise, but from desire. A dangerous desire that completely ignored the rational warnings of her mind. "This is madness," she murmured. But her hands found his chest, feeling the accelerated heart beneath his shirt. "Every true passion is a form of madness," Henry responded, his lips brushing her forehead. "The question is whether we are willing to embrace this madness or flee from it." Elaine should have fled. All signs pointed to danger: the mysterious deaths, her own strange behavior during the previous night, the letters from dead women. But there was something in Henry that called to her more strongly than any rational caution. Perhaps it was recognition, wounded soul recognizing wounded soul. Or perhaps it was something darker, the fatal attraction that Anna and the other women of the family had felt. "Show me," she said impulsively. "Show me Anna's diaries. I want to understand what she discovered." Henry studied her for a long moment, as if assessing her determination. "Are you sure? What she wrote may change you, Elaine, may make you see things you'd prefer not to see." "I'm already seeing things I can't explain. I need to understand what's happening to me." He nodded slowly. "Then come, but this time we'll go during the day. The mansion behaves differently under the sun." The next morning, Elaine woke without the strange physical signs of the previous night. Her clothes were where she had left them. There was no mud on her feet, and she clearly remembered every moment before falling asleep. Perhaps Henry's presence had somehow protected her from the influence that had affected her on the first night. They met at the main entrance of the Van Saunders mansion, an imposing dark wood door ornamented with family crests. In daylight, the construction seemed less threatening, more like a museum from a past era than a haunted house. "The diaries are in the office Anna used," explained Henry, as he led her through corridors that seemed different from the library she knew. She spent the last months obsessively translating ancient documents and connecting historical dots. Anna's office was a sanctuary of chaotic research. Maps of the region covered an entire wall, marked with symbols and annotations in various languages. Piles of books rose like unstable towers on every available surface. And at the center of it all, an antique desk covered with diaries, some in Danish, others translated into English with the meticulous handwriting of an academic. "She was an anthropologist," explained Henry, noting Elaine's astonishment. "Specialized in fertility rituals and pre-Christian religious practices. When she began to investigate the deaths in the family, she applied her academic expertise to the mystery." Elaine picked up one of the translated diaries and began to read. Anna's writing was clear, methodical, but as the entries progressed chronologically, it became more frantic, more urgent. "September 15th, read Elaine aloud. Found references to a Celtic ritual called Offering of the Weeping Waters, practiced in locations where women suffered violent deaths, especially suicides by drowning. The earth supposedly becomes thirsty for female suffering, demanding regular offerings to maintain balance." Henry sat in a nearby armchair observing Elaine read. "Continue." September 22nd. The deaths in the Van Saunders family follow the exact pattern of the ritual. Women led to water during states of trance, always in moments of emotional vulnerability. But there's something more. The men of the family appear to be unconscious catalysts, channeling the influence of the land. Elaine paused, looking at Henry. "She's talking about you, about your family, as if you were instruments." "There's more. Read the entry from September 28th. Elaine found the date and continued. "Discovered records of a Native American tribe that inhabited this region before colonization. They considered this area sacred, but also cursed. There are mentions of a mother of deep waters, who demanded sacrifices of young women to protect the fertility of the land. When the Europeans arrived and expelled the tribe, the rituals ceased, but the entity remained." "And the entry for October 3? Elaine leafed to the date, her hands trembling slightly. "Arthur Van Saunders, the first of the family to settle here, bought the land, knowing its dark history. The prices were abnormally low due to local superstitions. He deliberately built the mansion on a site that the natives considered a portal between the world of the living and the dead. Anna believed that my great-grandfather made a pact, said Henry calmly, wealth and prosperity in exchange for regular offerings. He may not have fully understood what he was agreeing to, but the consequences were passed down to subsequent generations. Elaine continued reading, each entry revealing deeper layers of horror. Anna had documented astrological patterns, lunar phases, even analyses of the soil around the locations where the deaths occurred. Everything pointed to a supernatural intelligence that operated across generations, patient and persistent. "The last entry," said Elaine, her voice almost a whisper, "Theosin no Kima Nasbi, October 5th, 2 days before the incident in the pool." Read it. He doesn't know what he is. Henry carries it inside him like a dormant virus, transmitted from father to son through generations of Van Sounders. When he finds a woman who resonates with the emotional frequency the entity seeks, wounded, lonely, strong enough to be a worthy offering, he becomes an unconscious magnet. And the woman begins to walk, always toward the water, always during sleep, and always she goes voluntarily, because in the end the promise of peace outweighs the fear of death. The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Elaine placed the diary back on the table, her hands visibly trembling now. "There's one final entry," said Henry softly, "written on the morning of the day I found her in the pool." Elaine didn't want to read it, but knew she needed to. She found the date and saw that the handwriting was erratic, desperate. "I've discovered the truth about Arthur Van Saunders. He wasn't the first to make the pact. There are records of a previous agreement, signed in blood by a man named Arthur Davis in 1847. Davis, my mother's maiden name. Elaine needs to know. If she comes, as I know she will, she needs to understand that it's not coincidence. This is what I was brought here for, to find her, to prepare her. Elaine Davis is the final offering, the one who will seal the agreement forever." The diary slipped from Elaine's trembling hands and fell to the floor with a dry sound that echoed through the office like a gunshot. Davis, her maiden name, the name of the family she had abandoned when she married Mark, was there written in the desperate handwriting of a woman who died decades ago. "This can't be right," she murmured, backing up until she bumped into the bookshelf. "Arthur Davis. I've never heard that name in my family." Henry rose slowly, as if any sudden movement might break the fragile balance of the moment. "Anna spent months researching genealogies. She was certain you would come, Elaine. She left specific instructions about how to find you when you arrived. How could she know I would come? I didn't even know Stone Ridge existed until I saw the cottage at online. Did you choose this place randomly?" Elaine opened her mouth to say yes, but the words died in her throat. She remembered the morning she decided to leave Springfield, browsing vacation rental sites with no defined criteria. There were dozens of options that were closer, cheaper, better equipped. But when she saw the photo of the cottage in Stone Ridge with a view of the misty mountains, she felt an inexplicable attraction, as if she recognized the place, though she had never been there before. "It called me," whispered Elaine, the terrifying truth finally crystallizing. "Somehow this land called me." Henry nodded gravely. Anna predicted this. She left more instructions, Elaine. A plan to break the cycle. "What kind of plan?" In response, he walked to a locked drawer of the desk and removed an old key from his pocket. Inside the drawer was a detailed map of the property, marked with strange symbols and annotations in various languages. "The entity is anchored to specific locations," explained Henry, spreading the map on the table. "The pool is just one of the access points. There are others, the lake at the back of the property, an old well in the cellar, and this." He pointed to a symbol marked in the forest east of the mansion, a natural spring that the natives considered the heart of the portal. Elaine studied the map, trying to process the implications. Anna wanted to destroy these locations? Not destroy, purify. According to her research, the pact can be broken if the original descendant voluntarily offers her blood to the spring, not as a sacrifice, but as a release. An act of conscious will that reverses the original agreement. My blood. Elaine instinctively touched her neck, as if she could already feel the blade. And if it doesn't work, what if it's just another trick of the entity to get what it wants? Then, we die trying to break a cycle that has already killed dozens of innocent women. Elaine walked to the office window, which gave a view of the pool where Anna had nearly died, and where his own mother Letitia had met her end. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the cloudy sky like a dark mirror. "There's something I still don't understand," she said. "Why you? Why are the Van Saunders men catalysts? What do they gain from it?" Henry joined her at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass like intertwined ghosts. Prosperity, success, protection against death from natural causes. The men in my family live long, prosperous lives, Elaine. My great-grandfather died at 92, my grandfather at 89. My father would have lived longer if he hadn't decided to break the cycle. Your father tried to break the cycle. After my mother's death, he began to research just as Anna would decades later. He discovered the truth about the pact and decided he couldn't live with the weight of more deaths. He committed suicide. When I was 15, believing his death would end the curse. But it didn't. No, because the pact wasn't tied just to him, but to the land. And because I had already been born, already carried the mark, the entity simply waited for me to mature. Elaine turned to face him. And now, if we do what Anna planned, if I offer my blood to the spring, what happens to you? Henry hesitated, and Elaine saw the truth in his eyes before he could speak. I don't know. Anna believed I would be freed along with the souls of the dead women, but it's also possible that you die along with it. It's possible. Elaine absorbed this in silence. In less than a week, she had gone from a divorced woman seeking peace to the center of a supernatural conspiracy that went back generations. And now she was being asked to risk not only her own life, but potentially the life of the man she was falling in love with. May I ask something? She said, something personal? Anything. Do you love me, Henry? Or is it just the entity using me to attract you, just as it uses you to attract me? The question hung in the air between them like a fragile bridge over an abyss. Henry closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Elaine saw a naked vulnerability that made her want to touch him. I don't know where I end and where the influence begins, he admitted. But I know that when I look at you, I feel something I haven't felt since before my mother's death. A possibility of redemption, of breaking a cycle of pain that has defined my existence for decades. That's not love. It's desperation. Perhaps. But sometimes desperation and love are the same thing. Elaine moved closer to him, raising her hands to touch his face. What if I say no? What if I simply pack my bags and leave Stone Ridge today? You can try, but the attraction will grow. It will become an obsession that will consume your thoughts until you can no longer resist. And one night, without even realizing it, you'll begin to walk, and you won't stop until you reach the water. Like all the others. Like all the others. Elaine kissed him then, a desperate kiss charged with fear and desire in equal parts. When they separated, she made her decision. When do we do this, the ritual at the spring? Tonight is the new moon. According to Anna, it's the moment of least influence from the entity, when it's most vulnerable. Then tonight. Elaine took a deep breath, trying to find courage she didn't know if she possessed. But first, I want to go to Bartonville. I want to talk to Anna. Henry frowned. Elaine, she's been in a catatonic state for more than 15 years. The doctors say she doesn't respond to external stimuli. But maybe she'll respond to me. If I really am who she was waiting for, perhaps my presence will awaken something in her. It's risky. What if the stress of the trip or the confrontation with Anna triggers the sleepwalking effect earlier? Then you'll have to protect me, said Elaine, surprising herself with her own determination. After all, isn't that why you're here? The trip to Bartonville was tense, punctuated by loaded silences and furtive glances. Elaine watched the landscape change through the window of Henry's car, mountains giving way to gentler hills, while a growing uneasiness took hold of her stomach. With each mile they drove away from Stone Ridge, she felt as if an invisible cord was being stretched in her chest, pulling her back. "You're feeling it, aren't you?" asked Henry, noticing her discomfort. "It's like I'm being pulled by a giant elastic band. The further we go, the stronger the sensation gets." Anna described something similar in the diaries. The entity doesn't like when its chosen ones move away from the territory, but she resisted for almost 2 months before completely succumbing. The Santa Teresa Sanitarium was an austere white structure that rose against the grey sky like a monument to human sadness. Well-maintained gardens couldn't disguise the oppressive atmosphere of the place, and Elaine felt a shiver run down her spine when they passed through the iron gates. Dr. Carver, the psychiatrist responsible for Anna's case, received them in his office with barely disguised skepticism. He was a middle-aged man with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much human pain. "I don't understand the sudden interest in Mrs. Christensen's case," he said, leafing through a thick medical record. "She hasn't received visitors in more than a decade since Mr. Van Saunders stopped coming." "It's a complex situation," explained Henry. "Mrs. Davis is writing a book about the Stone Ridge region, and Anna's case may have historical relevance." Dr. Carver studied Elaine carefully. "I should warn you that the patient has been in a catatonic state for years. She doesn't respond to external stimuli, doesn't speak, barely reacts to the presence of other people. I don't know what information you hope to obtain from her." "Just a few minutes," asked Elaine. "I promise not to disturb her." The doctor hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. 15 minutes, and any sign of agitation in the patient, you leave immediately." Anna Christensen was sitting in an armchair near the window of her room, staring fixedly at the garden without really seeing it. Elaine was shocked by her appearance. Grey hair cut short in a practical manner, a face that had once been beautiful now marked by the empty expression of someone who had disconnected from the world. She wore a simple hospital robe and slippers, her pale hands resting motionless in her lap. "Anna," said Elaine softly, approaching the armchair. "My name is Elaine Davis." There was no reaction. Anna's greyish-blue eyes remained fixed on the window, as if Elaine were just another irrelevant shadow. Elaine looked at Henry, who made an encouraging gesture. She knelt beside the armchair, placing herself in Anna's field of vision. "I read your diaries," continued Elaine. "Your research about my family, about Arthur Davis. You were right. I came to Stone Ridge. The land called me, as you said it would." An almost imperceptible change passed over Anna's face. Her eyes moved slightly, as if trying to focus. "Anna, I need to know if your plan can work. If offering my blood to the spring will really break the cycle, or if it's just another trick of the entity." Anna's lips moved, but no sound came out. Elaine leaned in closer, her heart accelerating. "What are you trying to say?" Anna raised a trembling hand and touched Elaine's face. Her touch was cold as ice, but there was something urgent in it. Her lips moved again, forming silent words that Elaine tried to read. "Don't trust," murmured Anna, her voice a harsh whisper after years of silence. "He isn't what he seems." Elaine felt a chill run down her spine. "Who, Anna?" "Henry." "But—" Anna's eyes shifted from Elaine and fixed on Henry, who had approached. What Elaine saw in Anna's gaze terrified her. It wasn't loving recognition, but pure terror. "No," moaned Anna, retreating in the armchair. He isn't real. Never was real." "Anna, what are you talking about?" Elaine held the woman's ice-cold hands. "Henry is trying to help. He wants to break the cycle as much as you wanted to." "Lies." The word came out as a hoarse scream. "He is the cycle. He is the manifestation of the entity. There were never any real Van Saunders men, just her, taking forms, to attract, to seduce." Elaine rose abruptly, looking at Henry with growing horror. He had backed up to the wall, his face as pale as paper. "Anna is delusional," he said. But there was something in his voice that didn't sound true. She always had these fantasies, that's why she's here. Is it true? Elaine asked, her voice trembling. Are you real, Henry? Instead of answering, he extended his hand to her. Elaine, you need to trust me. Anna is sick. She can't distinguish between reality and delusion. Answer the question. Are you real? Henry looked at her for a long moment, and Elaine saw something changing in his expression. The mask of humanity that had always seemed slightly artificial was slipping. Reality is a relative concept, he finally said, and his voice sounded different, older, echoing strangely in the small room. I exist. You feel me, touch me, desire me. Doesn't that make me real enough? My God, whispered Elaine, backing up until she bumped into Anna's bed. You're not human. I am more than human. I am the fusion of all unmet needs, all lost loves, all the female loneliness this land has absorbed for centuries. I am the answer to your pain, Elaine, the promise that you will never be alone again. Anna began to laugh, a terrible broken sound. He seduced me too, exactly as he's doing with you, and to promises of eternal love, of understanding, and in the end, just the cold water and oblivion. Elaine looked around the room, searching for an exit, but Henry, or the thing that appeared to be Henry, blocked the door. You don't need to be afraid, he said, approaching slowly. What I offer is real. Eternal love, eternal peace. No more pain, no more rejection, no more loss, just complete union with something that understands you perfectly. Because you're made of my pain, Elaine realized with terrifying clarity. You feed on it, transform into it. That's why you seem to know my deepest feelings. We are made for each other, literally. Come with me, Elaine. Let me show you what I promised to all the others. And if I refuse? The smile that spread across Henry's face was both beautiful and terrible. You won't refuse, none of them refused. In the end, they all chose eternal love over finite pain. Elaine looked at Anna, who had stopped laughing and was watching her with lucid eyes for the first time. There is a way out, murmured Anna. But you have to be stronger than your love for him, have to choose to live with the pain instead of dying without it. What way out, Anna? But before Anna could answer, the lights in the room went out, and Elaine felt cold arms close around her. Elaine woke up in the swimming pool of the Van Saunders mansion, floating, on her back under a starry sky that seemed impossible, considering it had grown dark at the sanitarium in broad daylight. The water was warm, comfortable, and for a moment she allowed herself to float, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in years. All the pain, all the losses, all the disappointments seemed to have dissolved in the water around her. Beautiful, isn't it? Henry's voice came from somewhere nearby, but when Elaine tried to locate him, she saw only the lights of the mansion reflecting on the pool's surface. Where am I really? She asked, but her voice sounded strangely calm. Am I still at the sanitarium? Is this a dream? You are where you have always been destined to be, in the heart of the promise that was made to you before you were even born. Elaine tried to remember how she had gotten there, but her memories were foggy, fragmented. She vaguely recalled the hospital room, Anna's terrified face discovering that Henry wasn't entirely human. But now, floating in that perfect water, those concerns seemed distant and irrelevant. You drugged me again, she murmured, but without real indignation. Something to make me docile. You're experiencing pure truth, Elaine, without the layers of fear and rationality that prevent you from seeing clearly. This is the same serenity that Letitia felt, that Carmen felt, that they all felt at the moment of their liberation. Elaine closed her eyes, letting herself be lulled by the warm water. It was tempting, undeniably tempting. No more loneliness, no more mourning for children that were never born, no more constant pain of a heart that had been broken too young and never managed to fully mend. But they died, she said, almost as if talking to herself. They all died in the water. They transcended, became part of something greater, eternal. Their essences merged with the land, with the water, with me. They will never again experience pain, Elaine, nor loss, nor rejection, nor the weight of time. Passing. Elaine opened her eyes and saw stars reflected in the water around her, as if she were floating in the cosmos itself. It was stunning, hypnotic, almost irresistible. Almost. Anna resisted, she said. That's why she went mad, but resisted. There must be a reason. Anna was weak. She preferred madness to transcendence. You are stronger, Elaine. I can feel it in you. Or maybe she was stronger than we imagine, strong enough to choose a painful but real life over a seductive but false death. The silence that followed was dense. Elaine felt Henry's presence materialize at the edge of the pool, his legs immersed in the water near her. "Why do you fight against something you desire so much?" he asked, and Elaine could hear frustration in his voice for the first time. "I can feel your loneliness, Elaine. Your hunger for true connection. I offer exactly that. You offer the illusion of it, and I've lived too many illusions already." Elaine began swimming toward the edge of the pool, fighting against the lethargy that seemed to permeate her muscles. "I lived the illusion that Mark truly loved me. The illusion that I could overcome the pain of losing Lucas. The illusion that having children would heal the emptiness inside me. I can heal that emptiness. You can't, because you're made of it. You are my pain transformed into seduction, my need molded into human form. But true love isn't born from pain, Henry. It's born despite it." Elaine reached the edge of the pool and grabbed onto the cold concrete. The contrast with the warm water was like a slap, clearing her mind. The artificial peace began to dissolve, revealing the trap behind the seduction. "You can't leave the water, Elaine, not without me." She looked down and saw that her legs seemed transparent below the surface, as if they were already dissolving. Panic hit her like a cold wave. "What have you done to me?" "The same thing I did to all the others. The process has already begun. Your essence is integrating with mine. In a few minutes you will be part of me forever, and I will be part of you." Elaine tried to get out of the pool, but discovered she couldn't lift her body from the water. It was as if gravity had increased tenfold, or as if the water itself had developed hands that pulled her back. "Stop fighting," said Henry, his voice becoming multiple, like a chorus of female voices speaking in unison. "Join us. Isabella is here, and Carmen and Letitia, all waiting for you. All part of the family you always wanted to have." Elaine closed her eyes, trying to find strength somewhere deep inside herself. She thought of Anna, alone and apparently crazy, but alive. She thought of all the small joys that still existed in the world, the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of rain on the roof, the possibility of writing stories that might help others feel less alone. "Do you want to know what I discovered?" "About pain," she said, opening her eyes and facing Henry's shifting form. "It's ours. It's real, and sometimes it's the only thing that proves we're alive." With a superhuman effort, Elaine dove completely, letting the water engulf her. But instead of surrendering, she swam to the bottom of the pool, where the pressure was greater and the illusion weaker. At the bottom, she saw skeletons of women, dozens of them, arranged in concentric circles like offerings on an underwater altar, and at the center, a hole that seemed to descend infinitely, pulsing with a blue-green light that made her eyes hurt. Elaine understood that this was the true heart of the entity, not Henry, not the mansion, but this portal to something that predated humanity, something that had learned to feed on human suffering and disguise itself as its cure. With her lungs burning from lack of air, Elaine swam toward the hole. If Anna was right about Davis' blood having power over the entity, perhaps her physical presence at the heart of the portal could do more than just free her. "Elaine, no!" Henry's voice echoed through the water, losing its seduction and revealing the desperation behind it. Elaine grabbed onto the edge of the hole and cut her palm on a sharp bone fragment. Her blood mixed with the water, creating red spirals that seemed to have a life of their own. "I am Elaine Davis," she shouted, though she knew her words would be lost in the water. "Descendant of the man who made the first pact, and I break this agreement. In the name of all the women who died here, in the name of those who can still be saved, I break this agreement." The light in the hole pulsed violently, and Elaine felt an incredible force trying to suck her in. But instead of resisting, she let herself be carried, taking with her the pure intention of sacrificing her life not to feed the entity, but to destroy it. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Henry's face dissolving like smoke, and an expression of what might have been gratitude or relief. Elaine woke on the shore of the small lake at the back of the Van Saunders property, coughing up water and gasping like a person who had nearly drowned. The sun was rising, painting the sky pink and gold, and she had never seen a more beautiful dawn. Henry was sitting near her, but he was different now. More solid, more real, and there was a peace in his face that hadn't existed before. "It worked," he said simply. "You broke the cycle. Are you real now?" "I am what I always should have been, just a man with all the imperfections and limitations that implies." He smiled, and it was the first truly human smile Elaine had seen from him. "The entity is gone, Elaine, and with it, the compulsions, the manipulations, the need for offerings." Elaine sat up slowly, still shaking. "And the women who died? Free as well, I can feel them departing finally at peace." They remained silent for a time, watching the sun rise completely over the mountains. Elaine knew she had choices to make now. She could return to Springfield, resume her old life, or she could stay and discover what it meant to love a man who was finally completely real. "What do we do now?" she asked. Henry raised his hand and gently touched her face, a touch without magic, without supernatural compulsion, just human. "Now we live, with all the pain and joy that implies. Together, if you want." Elaine looked into his eyes and saw not the impossible promise of perfection that the entity had offered, but something much better, the real, imperfect, and precious possibility of genuine human love. "Yes," she said, and for the first time, in years the word came without doubt